Hi.
Thank you very much, Wayne, and thank you all for being here. Wayne, I appreciate the opportunity and thanks for getting me all set up. Um, I am a fiduciary. I've been licensed about a year and a half now. I'm a reformed banker. Used to be a bank executive, board of director in a bank. And I focused on credit issues. So I was a chief credit officer of a number of institutions. And my goal today is to talk a little bit about fiduciaries, kind of demystify them a little bit, give you some comfort about some of the controls that are in place for fiduciaries. It can be somewhat dry, so I've also included some practical things that I've seen in my practice and that people are talking about, particularly for the elder community, some things that could be valuable to you. I love this term. I think Katie or someone in her office came up with this, fiduci what? And that the word is hard to say, and it reminded me of a story. This is a picture of a couple in a Nazi bunker after World War II, and it's near a city called Scheveningen. Now that's in Holland and the Netherlands, real close to The Hague. And legend has it that the way the Dutch people found out if Germans were spies or not is the Germans could not pronounce the name of the city. So unless you're Dutch, it's very hard to say Scheveningen. So that came to my mind related to fiduciaries, because if you're talking to a fiduciary and they mispronounce the word, well, that's a clear signal. Maybe talk to someone else. Anyway, that's the first levity. Definitions are really important. Uh, the fiduciary is someone who holds a thing in trust for somebody else, so they're a trustee. The key principle that I'm sure you've all heard is that the fiduciary has to implement the best interest of the consumer. Um, this is the most important thing for the fiduciaries. There are other people that are advocates for, say, a conservatee, but the fiduciary has to act in the best interest. Um, and if you're ever talking to a fiduciary about how they made a decision, whether it's a family matter or a neighbor, you can always ask them, was that in the best interest? Or why did you think that was in the best interest? Because we're constantly thinking about the pros and the cons and the alternatives. Should they live at home? Should they be in a facility? It's a constant thing for a fiduciary. The other thing I wanted to mention that is a fiduciary is a friend and a resource. I think some people can be put off by fiduciaries largely because of the word, but they really, most of the people that I've run into are like me, and they like to help people. So they're a friendly resource and are very approachable. They also know a lot of people in the community that can help, say, elders, a lot of care managers that are super helpful. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Family law lawyers to look over documents and make changes. We know a lot of people that are very specialized. Barbara was mentioning there was a LA Times article about an elderly customer that wired over $600,000 to a scammer overseas. It was at Chase Bank, and a lot of that goes on. And so fiduciaries are friends and resources, just like good neighbors can be. One of the most important things for a fiduciary is to perform an assessment. So if you're brought in to evaluate and manage the financial interest, you really need to do a risk assessment of all the financials. And if it's on the care side, do a full assessment of the home, the living conditions, the medical conditions, what medications are being taken. It's a very complex assessment that needs to be performed. And in fact, the code requires you to do that on the conservatorship side. One of the things that we're seeing a lot more of is replacement of current trustees that may not have the time or expertise, or maybe they're not close by. So maybe 10 years ago, someone who's getting older puts together their trust and says, I want, Johnny, my next door neighbor, to take care of me. Well, now it's 10 years later and Johnny's 10 years older. He's also continuing to work in his older years, and so he doesn't have the time and maybe not the capacity to no longer carry out the functions of a trustee. And so they will reach out to private trustees like me to perform the assistance instead. A fiduciary is like a quarterback. They direct all the activities. So as I mentioned, the care activities, the financial aspects, they're responsible to protect the conservatee. So there's a number of different levels that the fiduciary has to manage, and he uses teams of people to help him do that. One basic distinction I wanted to mention is there's a private fiduciaries that do private matters, and then there are also court probate matters. I do both, and the court probate is largely when someone passes when they don't have a trust, or if there are battles amongst the beneficiaries or potential conservators, then it goes to court and it goes to probate. To help put people's minds at ease about conservatorships, they're hard to get, and they're only gotten when they're needed. The court has to find that the conservatorship is the least restrictive environment for the conservatee. They want to allow them as much freedom as possible. I'll go through these kind of quickly, just the basic rules. Assist aging folks. Trust administration. I think you may have heard from others about trust administration. Probate estate administration, same thing with the lack of a will or trust. Conservatorships of the person and the estate. So conservatorship of the person is taking care of the individual, and the estate is the financial aspects. And then there's also a very technical area called the special needs trust administration, where you're assisting a disabled person while at the same time trying to preserve their eligibility for public benefits. So say they get an inheritance, you want to make sure that that doesn't push them out of getting public benefits. Pdca is a short acronym for planning, doing, and checking. It's kind of a feedback loop. It's important in retirement planning, right? Like we're doing ongoing risk assessments, evaluating our plan and our situation. It's just as important on the fiduciary side to, as we age, to manage who we've chosen to help us or how our assets will be distributed. Home assessments are key. It's one of the first things I do when appointed, is to check someone's home, make sure that there's adequate grab bars and steps are appropriately protected and there aren't a lot of carpets and rugs to trip over. Really, really basic things. And I know we all know this, but I wanted just to mention it to you that, falls obviously change lives, and this is really important stuff. As we all know, there's also a lot of physical and mental strain because of COVID isolation. We see that more and more every day. It's important, of course, to get the legal paperwork updated. If you've got a trust, take a look at it again every couple of years. We tell everyone to make sure you've got all the changes in place prior to any declines in capacity. So if you know someone who's getting older, maybe they're getting a little bit more forgetful, that's the time to make sure that the paperwork is all in place. Because once the capacity becomes a question mark, then it's really, you can't make those changes anymore. I want to mention bank and brokerage forms as a practical advice. I subscribe to the LA County Bar, and they have a forum for estate planning people and folks like me. And there have been a lot of banks that have not do not comply with basic durable powers of attorney, like the one you get on LegalZoom and online. They say they want their own form. So yeah, I see some heads nodding. It's really a problem. So if there's a substantial account that you know that you'll be relying upon for someone, or you rely upon for yourself in case something happens, make sure you have that form for that particular institutions, for that particular institution. Also, prior to changes in capacity, making your current wishes clear. You know, it's great when I'm in a position where I get to spend time with someone before they lose capacity to understand exactly how they want things to go and what their wishes are. This is a really boring topic, but it's really, really practical. I would say that it probably impacts all of you to some extent. There's two basic kinds of fiduciary standards. A lot of the investment houses were saying, well, we do things based upon your best interest, just like a fiduciary would. But in reality, it's not true. They used to have a suitability standard that said, well, as long as the investment, for example, was suitable, they could recommend that you do that investment, as opposed to that investment being in the best interest for you. So they could make fees off of this investment. They could be biased in their recommendation. The SEC has tightened it up in 2020. They said that these investment houses can recommend stuff to you as long as they disclose to you the amount of fees and that there's a relationship. And as we all know, those disclosures can be super long and unhelpful and sometimes buried. There are investment houses that are a true fiduciary that hold themselves to a fiduciary standard code of ethics. So if you have a question about who's managing your money, you can simply ask them if they comply with the fiduciary standard. If they give you a quick yes, you know they do. If you don't get a quick answer, they probably don't. And if you like them as an advisor, you can ask them to sign a fiduciary standard code of ethics. It's just something to be aware of. Real briefly, some key abbreviations. PFB, Professional Fiduciaries Bureau, they do the licensing and regulation and enforcement for fiduciaries. PFAC, you might hear, is a Fiduciary Association of California. NGA is the National Guardianship Association. And then a couple of areas that you may have heard, APS, Adult Protection Services. So this is where you can make reports or to initiate investigations of reports of abuse. And then similarly, the OSLTCO is the same type of thing where you can report abuse, but it strictly is related to long-term care facilities. Licensing requirements. I just want to mention this briefly so that you know that fiduciaries that are licensed go through a lot to get their license, and there's an enforcement process and they need ongoing training. It's all done by the Professional Fiduciaries Bureau. And they also comply with a code of ethics. They need an advanced degree, 30 hours of approved coursework. And then there's a national exam and a state exam. They also do a fingerprint background check, and they can find no fraud or negligence or dishonesty. And then there's an annual license renewal with 15 years of training. That's important because the training pushes us to stay in touch with what's going on in the current environment, not just the current laws, but for example, some of my training is with the district attorney in San Diego, talking about elder abuse cases and what they're seeing and how they're handling them. It really helps keep us up to date. I'm not going to go through the code of ethics with you. I just wanted you to know that it's out there. It's the primary thing that we're measured by, and it forces us to be good people and do the right thing. Decision standards, this is another important one for fiduciaries. They want to give the individual every opportunity to make their own choices if they're capable. If they're not quite capable, then the fiduciary makes decisions for them based upon the fiduciary's understanding of their desires. So that's why it's great to have a relationship with someone before they lose capacity to really understand their desires. And then as a third piece, if you can't figure out what their desires would be, you act in their best interest, reflecting what you know of their values. My formal remarks are kind of wrapping up, and this is one of the areas where I wanted to mention some more practical things. These are some things I see in my practice that have caused trouble for seniors, or some suggestions, or things to be aware of. Make a practice of shredding financial statements. Some of my clients don't get statements at their home anymore. There's caregivers there. There are people coming in and out all the time. But if they get them, we like to get them shredded. If they have money, there's in an account, there's no good reason other people need to be aware of that. This next one's a big one. To be sensitive and aware of situations where good family is not nearby or engaged. Wayne asked me for some juicy stories. I'm bound by confidentiality, so I won't be talking about anything that I've seen specifically. But this is a big one. And sometimes a neighbor starts off good, or someone starts off helpful, and over time they become entitled. So they feel like, boy, after 5 years of helping my neighbor with all of these things, I darn well better get some money out of this. I've earned it. And so you can see bad actors that are bad actors and do this for a living, which I've seen, and they're brilliant people. They're excellent manipulators, and there's no way that someone with limited capacity can stand up to them. So it's a pretty sad situation. But then I call it convenience abusers. Those people that start off trying to do the right thing, but actually over time start to really undue influence people for their own purposes. And we could talk more about that. When you think about the number of people that live around an older person in a neighborhood, how many neighbors there are, and you start to run the odds. Okay, how many? What are the percentage of bad actors? What are the percentage of convenience abusers? There may be 20 people around someone's neighborhood, and odds are likely that they're going to run into somebody like this. So without people around them protecting them and looking out for them, it makes them a real target. I tell everyone to use password managers in their computers. It makes life a lot easier and a lot safer. We can go into that in more detail if you like. And also to use two-factor authentication for any significant online accounts that you have. I like to set up auto payments for utilities and things. It's interesting that bill paying is one of the first skills to deteriorate when someone starts to lose capacity. So setting up some of those things automatically is very helpful. We've talked about home care assessments. In one of my ongoing training seminars, I ran into the University of Southern California. They made a presentation about how they're studying aging brain changes because they suspect that these changes to the brain can make us more susceptible to fraud. So they're actively looking for folks that have been scammed, whether it's gift cards or wire transfers or scammed in some way. They love to get those folks and have them do a survey, and they do a brain scan for free, and they're building quite a database of information. One of the things that they found that I thought was interesting is that folks that are more susceptible to a scam also have this real desire, real need to answer the phone. When the phone rings, they have to get up and answer it. I've seen this time and time again with people I've been working with. We could be in the midst of a really dramatic conversation, but once that phone rings, boy, they're up and they have to answer that phone. It's really one of the danger signs. And as I mentioned kind of before the meeting, I just got a call from one of my clients this week that got a call from someone who claimed they were from Amazon and wanted to have them access their computer and do some shenanigans. So be aware of that if you know folks that are like that. That's kind of an early warning thing, and let the phone answer itself and check the message, and you can return the call later. I mentioned the district attorney down in San Diego. We often think that, okay, if there's an active abuse situation going on, I know the neighbor's doing this, I know the care manager, or I know the caretaker is taking this, I'm just going to report it somewhere. The San Diego DA has come out and said that they are so busy with cases like this already that unless it's a huge dollar amount and it's in the active state of happening, like someone is walking to the bank to do something, they said they just can't respond to all these things. And really, we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg. As a community gets older, we're going to see more and more of that. And so my caution is just be aware that some of the systems and processes in place are becoming overwhelmed already. Something easy to do that I recommend that folks do is get a credit report freeze. If you haven't done it already, you want to talk about it, reach out to me. It's pretty easy to do, but it stops anyone from taking out credit in your name. If you need credit, it's a little bit of inconvenience because you have to work your way through the system a little bit. It's not a big deal, but it really provides peace of mind to people to know that their identity can't be stolen for purposes of accessing credit or creating loans. We mentioned the adult protection services and the long-term ombudsman. I've been part of investigations with APS, and they do a great job. Their role is to investigate things. They don't fix things. So sometimes it seems like there could be more that they could do, but I think it's important to understand their role, that they investigate things. We're seeing a lot of isolation and in elder abuse and undue influence. People come in and they become the gatekeeper. So one of the things to look out for is the helpful caretaker that starts opening the mail to assist the person. They can really start to isolate the individuals, not just physically from people, but also through the phone. They'll start answering the phone. They'll even provide phones to their targets so they can see all the calls that are being made. One of the other things they like to do is they will set up accounts in their name, in the target's name, but with the mailing address somewhere controlled by the abuser. They will also set up online accounts in the same manner, where they only know the passwords. The conservatee or the individual doesn't know the password, so they can't control it. So the gatekeeper, the person trying to isolate someone, will take control over their phone bill, their email accounts, all of their utility accounts, their TV, they take over everything. And one of the key things that I've learned on a practical basis is that if you suspect there's some abuse there, ask the abuser to take a step back. So, for example, if they're providing meals every other day to your neighbor, and you're concerned about them getting too involved, gently ask them to say, "Hey, we're going to get meals from somewhere else for a while. Really appreciate your help, but we won't need you for a little while at least, and we'll get back to you." And see how they react. If they have bad motives, if they feel entitled, they will come back very strong and won't want to step back. And it's a nice I see it as a semi-harmless way of testing the waters to see what you're up against. Now, I will say I've run into situations where there are multiple abusers. So it's really pathetic, and it's scary because of the competitiveness. They each fight harder than they've ever fought in their life, because not only do they want to get what they feel like they deserve, but they'll be darned if somebody else is going to get what they've earned. It's really a scary thing to see. I wanted to mention temporary conservatorships can be put in place in emergency situations. So it's a practical solution where there are no other solutions. I've stepped in cases where there's been claimed physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, and the conservatee in this situation and their family and their neighbors couldn't handle it. It was just too much, and so they set up a temporary conservatorship for the individual with the court supervision, and we were able to get things resolved. I wanted to mention as the last thing, just in closing, that there's a great resource with the Professional Fiduciary Bureau. I've included the link here. They've got links to over 30 elder organizations that can be helpful, whether it's for reporting things, getting information, super helpful. And then they've got another 10 links for people with special needs. Special needs can be very technical. In fact, I'm going to a 2-day seminar, or it might be remote, where all they talk about is special needs, the current accounting, tax, and estate planning issues that come up. It's very technical, very complex, but really important. So anyway, those are a good place to go for resources. They also talk about the fiduciaries' role and the licensing and things like that, but these links I felt were really helpful. So that's the end of my prepared remarks. Certainly open to taking questions or talking about anything you like. I'm sure you might have some other situations yourself, Barbara.
I have several questions. On the previous page, when you had all of these potential problems, can I assume that, or could we assume that if one had contracted with a fiduciary, that you would be protected against these financial scams?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, nothing's guaranteed.
How would that take place? How would the protection take place?
Depends how it would be set up. I would think that in a case where someone's losing their capacity, and they bring in someone like me, I would look at all the main elements. So the care, the financial aspect. That would be one of the first things I would do, would be to lock down their financials. So make sure that the banks are aware that things need my signature to be processed, as an example. we would make sure that the care management situation is under control, that the individual is going to their appointments, that the doctors know what other doctor appointments they have, what other ailments they have, what other medications they're taking and may need. And then on the financial side, again, putting in the credit freezes, setting up accounts such that there isn't a lot of liquidity lying around. We saw that in the LA Times article, and I've seen it where abusers will take smaller accounts and they'll start to, kindly help the person aggregate them into one bigger number at one bank. And then boom, in one transaction, they'll push it off to their own account or somewhere else. So taking control over the investments and the financial elements is really important.
Mhm. Okay.
Ron, I have a question. This is Betty Ann. In many cases, would you use your children instead of a fiduciary to
Boy,
keep an eye out for things?
That's a great question. Someone that I met with, a real experienced fiduciary, who's been kind of my mentor. We had lunch the first time I met him, and he said, "There's no way I would put my kids as my trustees." And I kind of thought, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. And he explained it, and it made sense to me. He said, "Look, I don't want them to be burdened with all that," and that made sense to me. But I thought, well, yeah, but my kids are different, and my situation's different. Well, after seeing what I've seen so far, I'm about to make some changes, I think, because I have great kids, for an example, but they approach things differently. And in the example where someone passes, where I pass, for example, it's very difficult. It's very time consuming. It's very hard to administer and liquidate someone's estate. And that's assuming it's a perfect situation where beneficiaries aren't fighting, and there's, it's an independent person that isn't grieving at the same time. It's a very challenging environment. And so I come in as a private fiduciary and will often be the one to administer the trust. And it makes for a much smoother transition. Of course, I'm biased, that's my business, but I'm trying to share my personal perspective as well. My kids are different, one's analytical, one's more seat of the pants. I can imagine they would arrive at different decisions differently and maybe have some conflict about it. So I always recommend to people that they bring in a professional on the front end. We can meet with the beneficiaries, understand their needs, and really make sure things happen much smoother.
Thank you.
Ron, I have a question. It's Katie.
Hi, Katie.
Is California unique in this kind of setup? Are fiduciaries like in all different states? I mean, just generally, I'm just curious.
I think generally there are differences statewide. I mean, state to state. And I'm only a fiduciary, the California licensed fiduciary. It's a little bit different. So each state kind of licenses differently. The licensing for fiduciaries is somewhat new. There used to be a lot of fraud and concerns, and so they decided to try and regulate it. I can't speak to other states, but I think they have a similar type of setup.
Mhm.
I did want to say that my experience as a social worker with conservatorship cases is that going back to Betty Ann's question about your children doing it, I had a number of situations where it seemed like there was almost a rule that at least one child would not agree with the others. And it usually had to do with decisions about dispensing of property, or even taking care of the remaining aging parent who needed, to be managed. It seems like that there's always one that doesn't agree with the others, and that holds the whole thing up. And then there's all this bickering going on, and it's, to me, it's an argument for appointing a professional. And it is exhausting. I was trustee for an older friend. I ended up being a trustee through default, kind of, because the first two people fell out. And it's really time consuming, and it takes a lot of expertise to manage. And then I ended up with an abusive caregiver who took advantage of my friend's failing mind to make himself the chief beneficiary of his trust. And that led to a whole nother can of worms. So, and he didn't have any children. So he was kind of like a victim in the water. We used to joke at work that as soon as somebody starts to become demented, it's like blood in the water for the sharks, because it doesn't take long for the abusers to identify who that person is and start circling.
Yeah.
Sally, you're muted, Sally.
That leads to my question about caregivers. How protected are you from this kind of abuse and fraud if you hire caregivers through a certified agency?
That's interesting. Well, I guess I would answer it. It might not be the perfectly satisfying answer, but when when I get appointed as a conservator, my personal financials and reputation is on the line. And what I do is I retain a professional caregiver agency. Because I feel like working with a professional can give me the most comfort that things are being done properly. And I've worked with a few, and they can be expensive, but I found that they're highly professional, and I can understand easily the scope of their services, what they're doing, what they're not doing. I can verify their insurance. Can verify they're paying their people taxes. There are just a lot of pitfalls that you can avoid by hiring an agency. And I will say a well-known or reputable agency. I'm not sure if that answered your question specifically.
No, that was good. Thank you.
Barbara?
You have spoken of conservatorship, but what if one is not demented? But you have concerns about your future. What is the relationship that one can develop with fiduciary or would develop? Well, the conservatorship means that the court has assigned you to take over, I think.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's an important distinction. So on the non-court side or the non-conservatorship side, I can come in most frequently as the trustee of the trust. So the person still has capacity. They meet with me. They say, "Look, I have all these issues. I'm trying to live in my home, but I need some help with my care. And I've got some investments and I've got bills to pay, and it's just too much. I want to live my life in peace. I want to know that my inheritance is going to go where I want it to go. I want to know that my wishes are going to be fulfilled. So, Ron, come in, be my trustee, and then I can step in and help them with a lot of things, but have access to the financials, have a legal standing to handle things in their life, even while they have capacity, but have just chosen to have someone else do it. So that's come up. I mean, that came up 2 weeks ago 4 people, a couple of neighbors and a distant friend were all trustees. And they said, look, we don't have the time to handle this. Our person is doing fine now, but they need a lot of help. And we just can't help them. So, that's what they were talking to me about.
Okay, is there a relationship short of that? Short of one of the fiduciary becoming the trustee?
There can be, for sure. Yeah, it could just be a friendly meeting to observe things and come up with some suggestions and work with the people that are responsible for the care. It could be a consulting arrangement where we do a deeper dive and we bring in a care manager to do an assessment. There can be a lot of different things. That's a great question. It can be tailored to the needs, but certainly an advanced meeting just to scope things out could be helpful.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the village and how, and our members, many who have distant relatives that are far away, some who have no relatives, people who are very competently handling their finances and their lives now. And how the village, maybe we need to set up some educational programs or something, or what we would like to know is, what is out there for us that can be of support in the future.
I think that's a great point, and we always also think about the future, and sometimes it arrives much quicker than we anticipate. And so preparation is key. So establishing a relationship with someone, whether it's formally or not, just as a trusted advisor or a friend or something, just to have that communication channel set up, someone that could work with people in our community and just check in with them, I think could be helpful. I also should mention, I didn't go into it in detail, but there's a lot of technology out there these days that can be helpful. So it's not the kind of technology that people who are staying in their homes have to try and handle or manage, but it's technology that people like us that want to help them and just make sure things are going okay can be used. So for example, if we're concerned that someone's taking their medicine every day like they're supposed to, it's not completely fall safe, but one thing that's been suggested is to put a little sensor on their cabinet door where their medicine is, and you can get an alert every time it's open and closed. And so if it goes a couple of days and you haven't seen that alert, you kind of know, well, there's something you need to check in on. So that's one example. For people that are remote, there's a lot of technology. There are apps that are designed for people to message and send things amongst themselves. If they're a core group of people trying to look after someone, that's a technology platform that can be used to communicate specifically outside of your regular messages and chats and emails and things. So it can be very focused and very helpful.
Thank you.
This is Betty Ann. One thing that I know is that a friend of mine who's 92, I think what he's done is he's set up a thing where his son can see his bank account and can tell if he's paying his bills. That is probably a kind of technology in a way that either a fiduciary could do or your child could do to see if things are beginning to slip or you're sending money to people he doesn't know and stuff like that.
Right. No, that's right. And they can be on the account. They can direct investments. They don't need to be a joint account holder, which triggers some tax issues. But they can be a separate person that manages that stuff. And that's kind of the paperwork that I was talking about when I said take a look at everything while you have capacity and get things set up, get people to give them the control over some of the financial accounts, such that if you need money and you can't transact anymore, that they can make sure that you get what you need.
Paula, do you have a
Okay.
question?
Yeah, does a fiduciary also early on act as a financial advisor, or should that be a separate person?
It can be separate. A lot of times it's the same, so it can be both. Sometimes a fiduciary will manage the investments themselves. Sometimes they will hire another investment advisor, if you will, to manage it. It kind of depends upon the nature of the portfolio, how complex it is. But if there are financial assets and someone is the fiduciary, it's their responsibility to manage those things. So they need to be involved, and it's a good way, a good check and balance. Even if you've got money invested in a major brokerage house, we're trained on investments as well, and so it's important to have another layer of someone just looking out for things.
What are the minimum number of assets that a person might have to hire a fiduciary?
That's a great question. The way the fiduciaries get paid is either on an hourly basis or a percentage of assets basis. So I think your question is kind of primarily on the percentage of assets. There are some well-known fiduciaries that say they won't work on any cases with a net worth less than $5 million. So these people have been around for a while, and they've chosen to make the higher end kind of their business. There are people like me where we don't have a minimum.
Okay.
We do some pro bono work, and that gets eaten up pretty quickly. And we try and be helpful in the community. So I think we take a look at all situations. And I will say also that the care managers and fiduciaries, we know a lot of public programs. We know a lot of things that can be beneficial for people. And we're very, very value oriented. I think some people think about fiduciaries, like in the movies, but they're more very, very value oriented and really want to provide services at a value point for the individual. And it can make a dramatic difference. I'll just mention one more thing. It's like you're going to have work done on your home, and you've got you're going to do the bathroom, you're going to remodel, you're going to add a second story, you're going to do the landscaping. Well, if you bring in a general contractor, all those independent trades are probably going to be done for a lot less and a lot better, because the general contractor will bring in the people that he knows. He'll create efficiencies. He'll do two different things at once with the same contractor. It's the same kind of thing in the fiduciary world, where we've got our fingers on the pulse of good quality people that can provide valuable services, value services.
So while you're still at capacity, that seems like the time to choose a fiduciary, because later you might not be able to make that as good. Might not have the connections and the ability to make a good choice. So how should somebody begin to find one?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just establishing rapport with someone. I think, there are different services. I think I know the PFAC that I mentioned has a fiduciary search function. I'm in there. There are plenty of other great fiduciaries. I think that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't cost anything to interview a few different fiduciaries. You probably get some free information, and you'll probably pretty quickly get a sense of which one people have more rapport with.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't mention the word rapport, but that's a big one. People working together, especially as they get older, they want someone they have rapport with, and I think it's a great idea.
Thanks.
This is maybe a stupid question, but it's a basic one. Define trustee and conservator.
I'm sorry, I couldn't, did you say define it?
Yeah, I know what a trustee is, I think, but what's a conservator?
So a conservator is a court-appointed person that becomes responsible for the care of the person or the estate of the person or both. So someone's losing their capacity, they're being assaulted by an abuser. There's no one around to help them. They can set up, go to the courts and petition the court and say, we have this person that has a real need. We need someone to step in under the court supervision to take care of them financially, health-wise, or both.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah,
Ron, I have a question.
wait, I think we also had, Marcia, did you have a question?
Yes, actually, Ron, I appreciate this is a lot of good information. In my career in estate planning over many years, I have seen so many scenarios and issues. And I would just say, piggybacking on what others have said about education and planning and we should have been doing this before this conversation. But it's not too late, and it's important to kind of have all of these discussions. And the other thing I would add is communication. I think it is very important, and Betty Ann talking about, well, would you have your kids do it or this or that? It's important, I think, in any of the plans that we have and any of the strategies we're thinking about, that we're communicating that with our families. They are different. The kids, as you're saying, Ron, they have different approaches and different ways of dealing with it, but it's important that the family unit understand what the thinking is and where you're going and how those decisions are made and why. And they can appreciate that, instead of one of the three kids doing it, that it might be a separate person that is the trustee for all the reasons that we've talked about today. But it saves a lot of angst as people get older and capacity issues happen. And it's just, I appreciate very much you bringing all of these topics, the fiduciary, trustee, conservatives, all of these topics up, because we all need to be dealing with that. And we need to have our legal documents in place and the communication flowing of and it can change over time, but at some point capacity is going to take over, and we want to make sure at least we've got something in place and ready to go.
Betty Ann?
Great.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I guess in my own mind, a lawyer does a lot of these things for a family. So I'm a little confused between a fiduciary versus your lawyer.
That's a great question. So I get a lot of referrals, most of my referrals from attorneys, estate planning attorneys. So as Marcia was saying, the family will come in and they'll talk to Marcia and say, Marcia, we're going to put together our estate planning documents. And Marcia will say, okay, well, who is going to be the trustee in the trust? And then the discussion goes towards, well, maybe it helps to have a private fiduciary be the trustee in this case.
So you're saying the lawyer might suggest that?
Yes, right. They're the one putting together the documents. So my name would be listed in the documents. The estate planning attorneys do a great job, and I meet so many of them. And they're doing a lot of work ahead of time, trying to figure out what could possibly happen and trying to encourage their clients to check in with them when things change, or even if you don't think things have changed, check in with them again. They have an incredibly difficult job to kind of see the future and protect things as best they can. And so when I get relationships with estate planning attorneys, they get to know me. They know what I can provide. They know the value that I can provide and how I could help certain families. You know, they won't recommend me for all families. They won't recommend a fiduciary for all families, I'm sure. But in many cases, you know, they're the one that makes the referral.
Okay, thanks.
Sally?
My question is, do you work regularly with aging life care managers, and what kind of relationship might you have with them?
I do. That's one of the most important relationships I have professionally, because there's a lot I don't know for sure, and these folks see things every day, day in, day out, and so I have relationships with some very, very good ones that have been invaluable to me and have made my clients' lives so much better.
I know with a aging life care manager, your relationship starts with them when they do an evaluation and write up a report, making recommendations. And then for most of them, they're kind of on an as-needed basis, and their fees are based on what specifically they do for you. How would one go about contacting and making a relationship with a fiduciary? Is it similar to that, or could it be?
Yeah, I think it can be similar. Reaching out and interviewing some and using them as needed, if you will. I think that's appropriate.
Well, it's 11 o'clock. Are there any other burning questions or pithy comments?
Pithy.
I hope
people
it's
wanna
12
know.
o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry,
I
12 o'clock. Yes. We had daylight savings time happen. And I want to thank Ron for giving us a very interesting presentation and trying to unconfuse us all about the role of fiduciaries, conservators, lawyers, care managers.
It was super helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you, my
much.
pleasure.
Thanks, Ron.
And he's still on our board of directors, so you still have access to him.
Yep.
You know where to find me.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ron.
Okay, thank you,
And,
everyone.
You might be hearing from